The latest chapter of the MCU, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, comes out in theaters next week. I was lucky enough to see it last week, so let's talk about it. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings takes place after the events of Endgame and tells the origin story of Shang-Chi. Now, I can't say that I'm particularly familiar with Shang-Chi from the comic books, but there were three things that had me very excited about this movie. First off, I'm just a big fan of the MCU. Second, I'm a very big fan of martial arts films. And third, the director of this film did a couple movies over the last 5 years that just really resonated with me on an emotional level. So this is a movie that had my attention. Did it live up to my expectations? Well, I'll let you know my thoughts in just a second. First off, join me down below in the comment section. Let me know your level of excitement for this film and what you want to get out of it. With that said, let's get started with the good. First thing to talk about here is that this is very much a genre blender. It's one part martial arts film, one part family drama, and one part fantasy, and all told with the MCU polish on top of all of it. I went in expecting the martial arts stuff, but it goes so much further into fantasy, and it's actually allowed to get a little bit weird in the third act, and I thought that was actually a positive thing, and so it had more to offer than I was expecting. But like I said, it's also a family drama. It's exploring this family dynamic, their intricate relationships going back throughout their entire lifetime, and so it's not as easy to classify as it seems from the trailers. And as I've discussed in regards to the MCU many times, one of the things they're very good at is telling stories from a bunch of different genres while all feeling like they fit inside of the MCU. And this one, by being a martial arts story while also having a bunch of criminal underground elements and getting very weird, especially in the third act, it fits in the MCU while doing a bunch of new and different things with it. Speaking of the martial arts, it's pretty safe to say that this has the best fights of any movie in the MCU. And it's not just because it has a bunch of fight choreography that's shot well, it's a celebration of an homage to multiple different styles of Asian martial arts fight sequences. So several of them are these elegant wire fu fights. In the West, probably the most viewed version of this would be like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. And then multiple sequences pay heavy tribute to the work of Jackie Chan, in particular the bus sequence where he uses the environment around him, in particular his jacket, something that Jackie Chan very famously did, but also in the way he patterns his combinations. There's a certain cadence to it, and that's what Jackie Chan would do with his fights.
And the rhythm, boom, 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 coming very nice.
And then also you get these big feudal battles in the film. So it's very much paying tribute to multiple different styles of Asian martial arts films. If you aren't aware of this, my first movie review website was a Jackie Chan fan page back in the late 90s. I loved Asian martial arts films at the time, and my current channel grew because of all my MCU content. So having an MCU film that pays so much tribute to these films that were so important to me during my formative years just puts a big grin on my face. Next thing you gotta talk about with this movie is that you just have a nice balanced set of characters. Leading the story is the pairing of Shang-Chi with Awkwafina because, well, she's just essentially playing Awkwafina in the film. And I think the dynamic between the two of them really works. You buy into their friendship. And while Awkwafina obviously has this big personality, he plays really nicely off of it, and so she can bring the energy and he grounds some of the situations just a little bit, but you believe that they have this relationship that goes back a long time and they really care about one another. How much you enjoy Awkwafina's character depends entirely on how much you enjoy Awkwafina's shtick. I enjoy her as a performer. I think she does bring energy to movies, so I thought she was a nice addition here. And her character does get in on the action all throughout the story and plays a part in what happens, so she's not just there to be comedic relief. But beyond that, all the characters kind of fill out the story in some sort of way, where like Shang-Chi has a sister and she's very different from him as well as different from Awkwafina, and fleshes out the world in this story and how the actions of their father affects different people. So it just all has interesting dynamics to it. And finally, Tony Leung plays one of the better MCU villains that we've gotten up to this point in time, because he's a conflicted character with competing value sets, and we see both his good and his bad side, and we understand what drives each of them. And so in every interaction, it's not easy to predict exactly where he's going to land or what he's going to do, because there's so much going on behind the scenes with him. And I thought they played it out really nicely throughout the film. And finally, I think the director was given a little bit more freedom than usual in the way that he decided to tell his story. Because at its core, it is about this family and their dynamics, there's a lot of flashbacks following each of the different members of this family and helping us understand why they are the way they are, what drove them to do what they did. And there just haven't been a lot of MCU films that have tackled family dynamics and storytelling in this particular manner. And so it just felt a little bit different. The movie has all the MCU-isms that you expect, but I think he was allowed to put his stamp on it a little bit more than, say, what we got in Phase 3. It absolutely feels like an MCU movie, but it doesn't feel like they squished it into the story template that they've used for their origin stories multiple times before. Also, this movie feels like a significant addition to Phase 4. One of my issues with Black Widow is that it was like, that was a fun story. It was nice to spend a little bit more time with Natasha, but it didn't feel consequential to the future of the MCU. Whereas with this film, it works as a standalone origin story about this character and his family, but it also feels like it's setting up future things in a way that mattered. Overall, it delivered what I expect from an MCU film, plus some new stuff that I enjoyed. But we do have some problems here, so let's move on to the mixed aspects of the film. First thing we gotta talk about here is the humor. It did make me laugh. I had fun with it, but there is a lot of forced MCU humor. If you're just tired of all the quips and the forced one-liners, this movie's probably going to frustrate you quite a bit. And as the movie goes along, it doesn't really lighten up. Like deep into the third act, when the stakes are as high as they get, it stops to do a stupid little joke. And did it make me laugh? Yeah, it did. Did it help the movie overall? No, I think it broke the tension at an inappropriate time with a very cheap joke. Other thing to talk about here are the post and mid-credit scenes. This isn't a good or bad thing, just something that you need to know about the film. There are two sequences. One is mid-credit, and it is very significant. You absolutely want to see that one. It does stuff to tease what's coming in the future, has some nice cameos, and has some big laughs in it. It has everything that you want from a post-credit sequence. It's a good one. And then the one at the end, it's more plot-based. It teases more future things. It's not quite as exciting, but it's significant and worth staying for. But it is a pair of solid post-credit scenes. From there, let's move on to the bad. And honestly, I think one of the movie's biggest liabilities are all the MCU requirements. And what I mean by that is that it has to have a bunch of jokes in it, it has to have a bunch of CGI spectacle, and it has to tie back into the MCU in a whole bunch of different ways. As I mentioned before, the movie is just jam-packed with MCU humor, and some of it works and feels appropriate for the moment, but other times it just feels like they're trying to force in jokes where they just don't belong because MCU movies are supposed to be really funny. Likewise, it's an MCU film, so it has to have a $150 million budget and a bunch of CGI spectacle, so they take like a fight scene on a bus and they just have to crank it up to 11, so all of a sudden the bus is out of control and it's breaking into two pieces and characters are flipping on the outside of it. So even so, though there is a bunch of actual practical stunt work and choreography going on, it's intercut with a bunch of CGI stuff where you know they didn't really do that. And it pulls you out of it, and while the spectacle is bigger, I don't think it makes for a more impactful fight sequence. As a point of reference, the other notable bus fight of this year was in the movie Nobody, which I find much more memorable and exciting because you know that is Bob Odenkirk beating up the guys from John Wick on a bus. Whereas with this bus sequence, it keeps cutting to things that we know didn't really happen. Likewise, the scaffolding fight, it has all this cool stuff happening, but you also know they were on a green screen. They weren't actually dangling from a building, and it cheapens the action a little bit, especially when you're playing homage so much to Jackie Chan, who is so famous for doing his own stunts in these insane things. When you're trying to copy what he did while at the same time being on a green screen and using CGI, it just doesn't have the same impact anymore. And then it's also a movie that feels like it needs to tie back into the MCU in a bunch of different ways. So this movie is jam-packed with cameos from characters, big, small, from all the different phases of the MCU. And some of them are nice little surprises, but other ones I simply do not think works. There's one character that shows up that I thought was gonna be a one-scene cameo, and then the character didn't go away and they kept sticking around, and I didn't think it worked with the one scene, and then they doubled and tripled down on it, and all of it landed flat for me. And finally, there's a number of sequences in the film that lack a certain amount of clarity as to exactly what was going on and why. Like with the henchmen in the first half of the film, when you know what's going on in the second half, it's very confusing as to why they did what they did in the way that they did it. And then as you move into the final battle of the film, you kind of know what they're trying to do, but not really. There's just so many moving parts and different people and groups. It's unclear what exactly we're working towards to be excited when it happens or afraid when other things happen. Real quick, before I give you my final score on this one, be sure to join me down below in the comments section. Let me know, what are you excited about with the movie Shang-Chi? Also, if you're new to my channel, I've done a ton of content related to the MCU. You can check that out right up there in that playlist. Overall, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is an exciting mix of the MCU, martial arts, family drama, and fantasy. As a fan of martial arts films in the MCU, there was so much about this movie that I absolutely loved. But you could also feel them trying to force a bunch of MCU-isms into the movie in a way that just felt unnatural, and I think it cheapened the movie a little bit, and there were a couple problems with the clarity in the storytelling. Put it all together and you get another solid MCU film that feels consequential for what's coming next, but not necessarily a top-tier MCU film. Overall, it's a B+ on the entertainment scale and 8.5. Of course, MCU fans should go see this one, as well as martial arts fans, but if you're someone that's just kind of burned out on MCU-isms, the forced humor, the over-the-top CGI, this might not be the movie for you. If you enjoyed this video, check out the rest of my MCU content right over there in that playlist. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.